Good early evening, everyone. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021, in the current state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic and Emergency Executive Order 2118, this work session of the Independent School District 279 School Board will be conducted via electronic means, which is an internet video conference. Superintendent Corey McIntyre and myself, Board Chair Kelsey Dawson Walton, have determined that due to the health pandemic and emergency declarations, a meeting format allowing for in-person attendance to the school board and superintendent is not practical or prudent for this work session. Members of the public may monitor the meeting electronically by streaming online from the direct website. An archived copy of the video recording of this meeting will also be available on the district website. So today's work session has a 4 p.m. start time because there is a primary election for mayor for the city of Brooklyn Park under Minnesota Statute 204C.03 Subdivision 1. School boards are prohibited from holding a meeting between 6 and 8 p.m. on the day that a state, county, city, township, school district, or other political subdivision election is held within boundaries of the district. We'll have a hard stop time of 6 p.m. for this particular work session. The purpose of the work session tonight is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. The outcomes of this evening's work session will be the board members will receive updates and information on Indian education programming as well as school board code of conduct. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask that board members please respond when I call your name. Director Thomas Brooks. I know he was having technical difficulties. Move on. I'll come back to him. Director Heather Douglas.
Present. Thank you.
Director Tamara Grady.
I'm here. Thank you.
Director Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
I'm here. Thank you.
Director Simons.
Here.
Okay, I'll go back again to Director Brooks. I don't see his name. I know he was logging in, so I'm sure he'll be on a little later. Superintendent McIntyre.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. And the superintendent's cabinet and other district administrative staff are also logged on to this video conference. So prior to moving into the agenda tonight, I wanted to open up space for our board members, Superintendent McIntyre, to provide any comments related to the Brooklyn Center Police involved fatal shooting of Dante Wright. As a school board, I believe we need to model the importance, and we have an opportunity to model the importance for all of us to be here for each other. And as leaders in education, voice our support to our scholars, staff, and school district community. There's been so much community unrest, and which has led to physical closings of our school board today and yesterday as a result of the fatal shooting. And the impact that this incident has had on is having on our community is compounded by the Chauvin trial and directly impacts our district. In our district, we're committed to promoting and supporting a community that's centered in equity and meeting the academic and social emotional needs for our scholars, which is core to our mission. And we can't have barriers for discussion. We need to support our scholars, support our staff. And I wanted to take this time prior to handing it over to Superintendent McIntyre to look at ways that, and hear from any board member and Superintendent McIntyre who have any comments or thoughts around the impact that it has on our district tonight. I won't be calling on anybody, so if anybody wants to say anything, please do.
Director Dawson Walton, I would like to take a moment to say something, but I just need a second to get all the kids that just entered my room out of the room so that they don't interrupt. So if you would just give me a second.
Of course, I understand that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mom mode.
Yeah, sorry. Right before you said that, my doorbell rang. So anyways, I apologize for that. What I wanted to say was that there's absolutely no doubt how tragic this death is to our community and amidst the grieving that's already happening. And I really just wanted to recognize how important it is that regardless of where we stand on any issue, that now is the time for us to come together in the areas where we have common ground and to unify as much as we can in every way that we can to support the needs of our community and our students and families right now. Unity is, I think, needs to be the theme for us, because this is, I think, it's been really devastating for everybody. And I just wanted to share how important it is for me personally, as a board member, to make that a priority in the work that I do for this district. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Grady.
I just want to offer my deepest condolences for the tragic death of Dante Wright to his family and friends and our community. Our grief is an opportunity to push ourselves beyond Minnesota nice so that we can have courageous conversations that will spawn bold action from each and every one of us. Because we have 400 years of racism to discuss and dismantle so that one day all mothers of Black sons will no longer experience this terror.
Thank you, Director Grady.
So my thoughts I would offer is certainly this is such a unnecessary tragedy on all levels. We don't want to see loss of life in our community. We don't want to see unrest. We don't want to see destruction in our community and division. And I had the opportunity to participate in the Brooklyn Park Community Foundation, very just a ad hoc come together opportunity for people to be heard. And that foundation actually came together after or was formed after last summer, the events of last summer with George Floyd, with the intention to drive change in the community. So a couple board members brought that opportunity together. And so I just had the opportunity to simply listen. And what I would share from that is that everybody's hurting in different ways, and everybody of all backgrounds has such a wide difference in level of experiences when it comes to race and discrimination and interactions and participation in our society, in our communities together. What I heard, people are really tired. The theme was tired. They're tired of the experiences that they're facing. They're tired of assumptions that this reinforces in many cases across all peoples. And we're tired of division, and division being reinforced. So it was, I think, when we hear from one another, real voices, when we aren't just looking at the TV, but when we come together and hear our own stories and our own voices, I think that's powerful, because we see each other as human beings in this community together, and in the mission that you articulated, Director Dawson Walton, and what we're trying to accomplish. Right now, there's a lot of people working in the community to ensure safety. There's city council members, there's city staff, there's police officers, there's people working to clean up what's happened in the destruction. It's impacting everybody. It's impacting everybody. And as was said, this is opportunity to come together, to see how different members of our community are hurting, different members of our community in terms of our district, our teachers, our students, students of color, students that have moms and dads that are in law enforcement, family members in law enforcement. And I think it's a time to just be thoughtful and reflective on what we can personally do individually to engage and to hear from one another, and to decide to to decide how we choose to be each and every day going forward and in our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Simons.
Does that leave me?
Director Mosqueda Jones. So whoever wants to.
Go ahead, Thomas.
So sorry, I'm popping on a little late. Just getting logged into this computer. So I'm on my phone now, which is why you have that view. I would just say that my heart is heavy. I'm still emotional, and haven't had any time to process anything that's happened in the last 48 hours. I want to offer my thoughts and prayers to Dante Wright's family. I'm also thinking about the community, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and across the metro. For the community that's having to revisit trauma that we haven't fully been able to process from the last year. We're all frustrated and all grieving this loss to our community and this loss for everything that we've been working for to keep our community safe. I keep thinking about our kids in the district, particularly those closest to where Dante Wright was murdered, and all of the locations of the protests and the looting. It's our job as elected and appointed leaders to make sure that our kids are safe in our schools and in our community. Among our duties of making sure they have a quality education. As an elected leader in the community, I feel it's my obligation to reassure them that they are safe in the community, that they are safe in our schools, and that our government, whether it's our cities or our school district, are doing everything in their power to make sure that they're safe, and that this system is set up for them to succeed. As a Black man in the community, I'm having to wrestle with the reality that I share the same fear as many, that a traffic stop or being in the wrong place at the wrong time can cost my life. I know there are a number of people working in this district and in our area to fix this system that's not set up for people of color to succeed. I can commit as a school board leader to make sure that I am reinforcing and encouraging decisions that keep our students safe, at least while they're within our jurisdiction, whether that is walking to school, on the bus, or in our schools. I can do what I can to influence and encourage safety within our community. And for those that don't know, I am also a Human Rights Commissioner in Brooklyn Park, and for the last year, and we'll continue pushing to make sure that this doesn't happen within the city of Brooklyn Park. I 100% understand the urgency of this. I'm sorry I haven't had a ton of time to process this. I know this was a last minute add to the agenda, but just wanted to say that I am thinking about our students. I am thinking about our families. I am thinking about our community. I want to be united, but I also want to be realistic that we have a serious issue that needs to be fixed. And it's going to take all of us school board members, city, county, state, to fix it. I'm sorry, I'll leave it there. For giving me some.
Yeah, thank you, Director Brooks. Director Mosqueda Jones, were you gonna say something?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your for what you've said so far. I just I debated whether or not to say anything tonight because Dante Wright lives within walking distance of where I teach, and his sisters are still in the schools where I teach. And so not only has it hit as a school board member for the Osseo School District, because that's where he died, but it also hits as a teacher in Columbia Heights, where we've worked to nourish and have a place where all kids can succeed and belong. The mission in Columbia Heights is a world of opportunities, and all succeed and all belong. And I've been working towards equity for 30 years in my career as a teacher and as a school board member. And I just need to say to our families who are hurting right now, that as a white woman, I will never understand what it's like to have to be afraid of every traffic stop or every time that your child goes out into the world, except for when my daughter does. And that I will continue to work to change the systems that create additional barriers in the school system. You are all in my heart.
Thank you, Director Mosqueda Jones.
Chair Dawson, well, I didn't know if you were gonna like to go next. I would like to make some comments too. I'll let you
Go ahead.
choose.
Go ahead.
Maybe you'd like to wrap it up. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And first, I do want to join the others in sharing and again extend my own sincere condolences to the family and friends of Dante Wright. Our communities are suffering. Our hearts are breaking. And with Mr. Wright's tragic death occurring at the same time that George Floyd's homicide is being recounted on a daily basis in the criminal trial of Derek Chauvin, it just fills me with a lot of grief. And I do want to share that as a school district, we're here to support our students and our families, and our staff are ready and able to help students talk through these challenging issues that they're experiencing on so many levels. I did want to just point out again, as we've been trying to communicate as much as possible, that our students and families can request assistance from any of our staff, who will do our best to put our students in touch with the right supports. We've tried to provide a number of resources to our families and our staff to help process through the devastating events that we're going through. Please know we stand with our students, our staff, and families of color, and we continue to advance our district's work. We have a long way to go towards our intended outcome of transformational change. I also wanted to once again invite our school communities to consider participating with us in the courageous conversations about race at our 8th Annual Community Forum on Race, which is next week. And it's again sponsored with local communities and a number of our educational institutions here in the area. It can be found on Eventbrite. But more importantly, I just wanted to say once again how much, as superintendent, I believe so strongly in our district's core values that affirm that everyone has an equal intrinsic value and everyone benefits when cultural differences are acknowledged and understood, and individuals are treated respectfully and equitably. And as we try to move forward together, we are committed. I know this board's committed to our work to improve our racial equity efforts and our outcomes for students. And we are, as one example, at about a year-long marker with our effort in our equity context analysis process that's really meant to identify those daily lived experiences and what we desire those to be with our students, families, and staff. So we're just even more resolute in that commitment moving forward as we try to meet the needs of each and every one of our students. So Chair Dawson Walton, thank you for just giving me a few moments to make some comments, and turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think that, hearing from all of you, our colleagues on the board, it's encouraging. I think we have healthy perspectives coming into how do we advance and move forward and drive change. I can't remember who said that. A couple of us said to really drive the change that's needed. Oftentimes I try to like look at things through the different lenses and hats, and in this situation, even with George Floyd, I can't help but look at it through a mother's eyes and a heart. And um, it is very hard to process. It's very hard I look at my own kids, especially my little boy who's 3, and he's 3, and I look at 17 years from now, and I think a lot of us moms do. We're like, what the hopes and the dreams and what they're going to be and where they're going to be. And to have that, taken, it's unfathomable and unimaginable. So my heart is with the family, the mom, Dante's mom. And I also I'm encouraged by the time that we've taken as a district, especially in this last year, to pause, to reflect on our priorities around equity, but not only just talking about it, but the actions. And I'm looking forward to the next couple months, really diving into what those actions are for our various resolutions that we've brought forth. But also just it's the work. I hate, it's like continuing to talk about the engagement work that we're doing, that we're committed to as a district through the equity and achievement department. I think that is just, it's going to be critical. It's going to be game changing, and it's going to hold us all accountable to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our scholars and our staff in our district. So thank you, all of you for just allowing this time. I think this is really, really important. So with that, I will turn it over to you, back to you, Superintendent McIntyre, to facilitate the remainder of the agenda tonight.
Thank you, Chair Dawson Walton and Chair Dawson Walton. And yeah, with heavy hearts, we'll move into tonight's agenda. We'll begin with providing you a follow-up to our recent work session discussion with our APAC committee on our American Indian education programming. And then our second item tonight is an update on the school board's work collectively and in partnership on a school board code of conduct. And Director Brooks and Director Douglas will present an update on that work for the board's consideration. So with that, I'll first turn it over to Michael Lehan, our Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement, to introduce our presenters for our first agenda item tonight. Michael.
I wish I had a little bit of time after what everybody just shared, and then having me go into it.
Michael, do you need a recess?
I think we should take a minute if that's okay.
Okay, we can take a minute. We'll come back in 5 minutes at 4:31 p.m. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you for that time. We're going to move into the code of, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Corey. Actually, I'm going to let Corey, you take it from
thank
here.
you.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're gonna make a change in the agenda just briefly. We're gonna flip the agenda items. So we'll first, with Director Brooks and Director Douglas, thank you for being flexible. We'll do our code of conduct presentation first, and then we'll come back to our American Indian presentation. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your flexibility. So sorry, Director Douglas and Director Brooks, but thank you for being willing to go first. I'll turn it over to you, Heather.
Thank you. No problem at all. I'm wondering if, being that this is a virtual meeting, if you want me to share my screen, or if somebody can share the screen of the code of conduct document.
I can try, Heather, unless you have a, then that way you can speak and not worry about that. So let me see if I can get that up for you, okay?
Okay, thanks. So I don't know if this, oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you. Thomas, if you're all right, I'll just go ahead and share what we did and then let you jump in with additional comments. Okay. All right. So Director Brooks and I went ahead and worked on school board ethics and code of conduct. And as we were researching other school districts, we also looked at our own school district's current policies and came to the understanding that within our existing policies, we actually already have adopted the MSBA, or Minnesota School Boards Association, Standards 1 document, which is their conduct and ethics. And this is indicated in policy 209, which says the school board freely subscribes to the tenets of the school board member code of ethics of the Minnesota School Boards Association. And that MSBA Standard 1 conducts and ethics is attached, as well as our existing school board policy 203 and 209. I've also attached District 196, which is the Apple Valley Rosemount School District, and their policy 203.7A. So after going through the MSBA standards, pretty much line by line, it came apparent very quickly that everything that's in there is already within, first of all, it's already been adopted by us because it's in policy 203, but some sections of it have actually been pulled out and are already identified in our policies 203 and 209. So after reviewing all of that, it felt a little bit redundant to adopt an additional code of conduct, being that we already have all of this identified within our current policies. After reviewing all of that and looking at other districts, the only other district that Thomas and I really agreed aligned most closely with our district's policies and the way that we operate was the Apple Valley Rosemount. And their policy, like I said, is attached. It's pretty much a copy paste of the MSBA. So we're kind of left with either we can create an entirely new document, which is adapted to fit our school district, or we can leave these policies as they are, or what Thomas and I recommend is that we have our general counsel, Tim Palmatier, review policy 203 and policy 209 for consistencies and updates, especially any updates that may need to be made respective to any like mandates or statutes that might have changed. Policy 209 has not been updated since its adoption, which was a little over a decade ago. So that one definitely needs to be looked at. And policy 203 was updated in 2018, but only the specific portion that pertains to filling a school board vacancy. So that obviously needs to be addressed as well. So in short, I guess what I'm saying is that after conversation and really going through each item, both Thomas and I felt that the MSBA existing standards of code of conduct and ethics are really pretty comprehensive, and we didn't feel that it was necessary to create an entirely new document. But we still have this existing issue of how to address concerns outside of that, which seems to be more procedural, and how we work together in developing resolutions, how we address grievances amongst ourselves or administration, if we have a conflict of interest, or if we were to add or remove or make changes to an agenda. And so both of us felt that the recommendation should be to, like I said, have general counsel review the two policies and make sure that everything that's in there is consistent with existing statute, possibly clean things up or make minor changes, and then create a procedural document for specific types of business that we do regularly. It does state in our existing school board policy that we'll follow Robert's rules. However, Robert's rules is quite extensive and a little bit, I can't think of quite the right word, but it doesn't always give us clear direction in how to proceed, because we're not a large parliamentary body, we're a small school board. And so sometimes I believe Thomas agrees on this, and I'll let him speak for himself on that, but what we need is more something that is specifically procedural for the type of work and business that we're doing, not a gigantic, nuanced Robert's rules, which is, and I think we can use that as a guide, but we've already had a little bit of disagreement about which rule to follow in certain circumstances, which is why I feel that having a procedure that is agreed upon by the board would be more beneficial to us as we conduct our business together. But I don't believe that should be policy necessarily, but more of a procedural guideline in how we operate together. And both Thomas and I agree that this is something that all board members need to have an opportunity to weigh in on, and that we shouldn't just be creating a document without having that conversation as a board, as a full board. So that is why we did not create a procedural document to present tonight. So Thomas, I'll let you go ahead and speak on that now.
Yeah, thank you, Director Douglas, for covering most of it. We, in reviewing the MSBA Code of Conduct, as well as that Apple Valley Rosemont model, the last thing we wanted to do was to add more rules or to make anything more complicated than it may already be. And that the same goes to that point that Director Douglas just made about Robert's rules. We all have jobs outside of this role, and to truly study and know the ins and outs of Robert's rules and its complexity, I think it just doesn't fit within this body of a school board. So the hope is that General Counsel can clarify, make clear in plain language what our code of conduct already is as it pertains to the MSBA model. And we can then work outside of that to develop some processes around many of the items that Director Douglas already mentioned.
Is that, do you want, can we ask questions or? Okay, I will start with Director Grady. Do you have any questions?
No questions, but thank you for your work. And I agree that reviewing both the policies would be a good idea. I like the MSBA standards and aligning those. And then looking at some of the other issues that we're having as just parsing those out as a team in terms of coming to a general understanding of proper procedure. So thank you both.
Director Simon.
No, that sounds like good recommendations. I do, except I agree with your recommendation that it should be more about procedure and to see if there's any gaps versus creating something new. That makes sense.
Director Mosqueda Jones.
So I know in many of our policies, there's a procedure attached to it. So are you seeing, are you envisioning like having the procedure just right attached to one of these policies? Or how are you thinking about that exactly?
I mean, that's something that we could probably discuss. Don't know that these features are really tied to code of conduct. If you look at many of the items, they are just very different and more focused on just being a good public leader, public servant, and team member. So yeah, that's something that we can certainly discuss, but I think it may be a separate procedure altogether, several separate.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when Thomas and I discussed it, I think it would be, I think we would have a better working relationship with each other if it was a procedure that we developed together and agreed upon processes for how we are going to operate as a board when one of us wants to either present a resolution, make additions or changes to the agenda, and those things. But I have concerns about having that be a procedure that's attached to a policy, because I think that really is board dependent and the board evolves. I think that should be part of, you know, like in January when we have our organizational meeting. I think that that's something that should occur at that time, where the board at that time, whoever those people may be, comes together and says, yes, I agree to operate under these procedures, or make changes to those procedures because maybe that board wants to operate in a different way. And that's my personal perspective on it, because like I said, there are nuances to the Roberts rules and how things can play out, and how the board has operated in the past. Like I know in the past I've brought up the example that certain boards have said that if any board member wants to add anything to the agenda, it will be added regardless. And not all boards may want to operate that way. You know, our board has typically operated in the way that more than one board member has to, a board member has to make a motion, another has to second, and then it has to be voted in. And so that's kind of a procedural thing that could be different depending on the people that are operating the board. So I really don't think it should be something that's very prescribed, but that is flexible enough that the board can choose to make changes to the way that it operates, so long as all the board members are in agreement that this is what our procedure is and this is how we are going to work together. outside of some of the things like the MSBA policies that are like, of course, we're all going to adhere to what our guidelines are as a governing body, but how we get there, I think, is up to us.
That totally 100% makes sense. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around like the specifics of, you know, because we're talking about how we do resolutions, if we do resolutions, how we do grievances with each other, all those kinds of things. Is that something, and I agree that it would be good to have that. And then at every time we have an organization meeting, if there's something in place, then we can say, yep, nope, let's do it a little different this time, that kind of a thing. What are we looking at for doing it to have that starting document? Is that another work session? Are we hashing some of that out here? Is it a board advance? I'm not sure how that looks, what that looks like.
Personally, I think the best case scenario is a professional development or board advance. I don't think it should take up our work session time because we have a lot of other really important work that we need to do. But if there's another way that we can do that without having to take another meeting away from the other work that we're doing, then I think that, I mean, I know I personally would be open to doing it in another way. Corey, I think you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, if it helps the board, you know, our intention was at next week's development session to have some conversation about specific procedural items like resolutions or like board agendas without any decisions being made, to give the administration some direction to bring back to likely the May work session on, you know, very discrete items like that. So those might be viewed a little bit outside of just how the code of conduct around the, you know, more of how you kind of treat each other and work together versus very specific process related things. And we were intending with to continue our work on those at our next development session together next Tuesday. So I don't know if that helps provide some clarity kind of to Director Mosqueda-Jones' question.
You know,
go
I
ahead.
just,
Go ahead.
go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to thank Heather and Thomas for their work on this.
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, absolutely thank you, because I know everybody has this is additional work for sure for each of you. So I appreciate you putting your thought leadership into this. You know, I guess, and maybe we'll get into this next week, but I was thinking along the lines of a code of conduct, code of ethics, of course, the procedural part of it, but also, you know, really laying out, and I understand, you know, I think we knew we had a sport standards document, but going a little bit deeper into kind of what is our approach in our agreement, for example, going into a little bit more, in addition to the agendas and whatnot, you know, public input, in how we are, you know, I mean, I hate to like minimize, but it's like, you know, what's our conduct with each other, right? Like, you know, that agree to disagree, or I mean, we've had, and it really comes from, in full transparency, you know, really contentious meetings. And how do we have a respectful meeting? You know, social media has so much to play in here, just like influencing all the time. And, you know, and I think that if we come together and have some agreements of how we show up. Obviously, we're not always going to be like totally in agreement, and that's okay. But just to have some acknowledge that even that there's going to be some differences, but at the core, this is where we are. And so I think that it would be like not recreating it, certainly, which I totally agree with, but maybe adding to it. And like I know you guys already mentioned some gaps, so like, you know, I've seen other code of conduct where they really are explicit, like avoid comments that personally attack other member or board members, or, you know, demonstrate effective problem solving approaches. You know, and what happens in private encounters, you know, things like that. I think it just, that's where I, you know, would like to see us go, in addition to the procedural pieces of the agenda. I definitely, or resolutions. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, or maybe you guys have discussed it. But.
Yeah, so there are some code of conducts that even go so far as to say this is how board members act with staff of the districts. In the case of city councils, some the council members are not allowed to contact staff directly, and if they do, then the staff member reports it to the city manager. So we can go as far or deep or comprehensive as we want. So I guess um, I think it's what's most important to capture, but I do like the idea of it being something that's reviewed at our organizational meeting each year. I think about any time a new team is coming together, what are the ways of working, we call them at my company. It's in those personal agreements on this is what we value, here's how we want to choose to operate, here are the standards we want to live up to. But I think I tend to agree that's maybe not a procedure or a policy, but more of a development type of document that we agree upon at the organizational meeting.
Director Chair Dawson Walton, sorry. To your point, I think, since we're already going through in a professional development session, some of these procedural questions, it may be worth having a discussion at some point in a professional development session on what some of these MSBA codes mean to us as a group. Because at the end of the day, I think some of these items are already listed in the code of conduct. So how it's interpreted and what we take away from it as one voice and one body, I think are maybe two different things. And so, yeah, it may be worth a more detailed discussion on that. I'm not sure that I'm supportive of adding more to the code of conduct, but of course, through discussion, if we end up there, then I'd be supportive of that at that time, but I don't think it's necessary.
Thomas, I just want to say thank you for saying that. Those are almost my sentiments exactly. Some of the things that you mentioned, Kelsey, are, in my opinion, addressed in the MSBA standards, but how we interpret them, I think, is the difference, and how we act on them is the difference. And so I 100% agree with your comments about having some sort of agreement amongst us on how we're going to treat each other and how we're going to behave. I think that's absolutely necessary, but I do feel that's more of a conversation and less of a written down prescribed document. One concern that I have when I was reviewing some of the codes of conduct for other districts that are very, very prescriptive and say, this is how you can behave and this is how you can't behave and this is allowed and this isn't, is my concern is, and I don't feel that anybody on this board would do this, but I don't want to put something like this into a policy for fear that somebody may try to take an innocent and healthy behavior and then weaponize it against another board member by saying, well, this is against this policy because I believe it is XYZ, because there's so much that's left open to interpretation. And I think that what we're trying to do right now in our professional development is work together better and to improve our relationships. And I really want to caution us against doing anything that's too strict and not allowing us the ability to have open conversations. And I'm afraid that if we have it be too rigid, that we might prohibit ourselves from having those really open and thoughtful discussions. And to Thomas's point, some of the things that you've mentioned are in the MSBA, but it's, again, the way you interpret it and the way that you use it makes a huge difference. And when I say you, I mean we, us, all of us, not you specifically, Director Dawson Walton. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a really good perspective. And we do need to have some agreements amongst ourselves on how we're going to interact with each other and communicate with each other as with respect, whether we agree or disagree, that needs to be a part of that conversation. So, but I am a little bit concerned about having it be written into policy, especially because the 6 of us may not be on this board in 6 years. It may be an entirely different board, and so that's just my perspective. So, any other comments or questions?
I'll go around one more time. Director Grady, do you have anything else you want to add?
Nothing else at this time. I'm looking forward to moving on to the next conversation.
Director Simons.
Nope, no more.
Director Mosquito Jones.
I'm good.
I guess I completely disagree. So I guess I'm on the other side of everyone else, but I think it is imperative that we, I think it's all in one. I think it's like we can easily parse out if it's policy, if it's whatever it is, but I think a code of conduct starts to show our values and where we stand. And I do think it being more explicit is better. We have not had the best track record in moving forward and advancing what we need to do in our communities. And I think that this is instrumental in making that happen. So I look forward to our session next week, and I'm glad we could have this discussion. So Superintendent McIntyre, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, board members. And I think the direction I'm hearing is we'll bring that back for additional board development conversation, along with I can continue to talk with General Counsel Tim Palmatier around the more of the technical side of the work that's been presented tonight, and we could probably still accomplish that review as well. So I think we can move both items kind of forward and continue to find where the board wants to go in coming together on this. So appreciate your work and just thank you, Director Douglas and Director Brooks, for continuing the conversation with the board, because I really think this is the work of the board together. So appreciate the extra time you did put in on this the last couple weeks, 3-4 weeks already now. So with that, I'm going to kind of move us back to our first agenda item, and thank you everyone for being flexible. I really wanted to make sure Assistant Superintendent Lehan had a chance to introduce our speakers and introduce this item. So thank you for adjusting the agenda just briefly. And Superintendent Lehan, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre, Chair Dawson Walton. I appreciate your grace. The word of the year is pivot. So that I appreciate the flexibility and the ability to kind of pivot and hold space. Emotions come when emotions come. It's important to hold that truth. Each of us are human, and we're each deeply engaged in the reality that we are in. So I appreciate the humanity that was extended there. So thank you. Board members, Superintendent McIntyre, fellow cabinet members, and members of the viewing audience. First, I would like to say Ramadan Mubarak to our scholars and their families, wishing each of you a blessed and happy Ramadan. We collectively acknowledge that our district resides on land that was cared for and called home by the Dakota people and other indigenous people. This land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its origin stewards, the Native nations, and the people of this region. We recognize and affirm tribal sovereignty and work to hold our system accountable to the American Indian peoples and nations. With me this evening is Ethan Neerdals, Coordinator of Indian Education, and Robin Gonzalez, Assistant Director of Learning and Achievement. Tonight you will hear a collaboration between our Department of Learning and Achievement and Department of Indian Education. Our intention is to focus, our intention and focus remains to clearly examine, critically examine, and deconstruct our curriculum to ensure that we have accurate, strength-based representation of our American Indian scholars. You will also hear about our TNEC engagement as well as the guidance received from our APAC committee, which continues to influence and guide our work. At this time, I welcome Ethan to present. Welcome, Ethan.
Hello, everyone. Hello, my relatives. It's good to join all of you again. I just wanted to stop by here to present a little bit on our Indian education program, and starting with our vision of Indian education. A lot of people have ideas on what Indian education is or isn't, but I really like the ASIO theme that we've been using for our Indian education program for over 30 years, enhancing the cultural identity of the Indigenous child. As Indian educators, we know that when we enhance this cultural identity, it provides a framework, a solid foundation for our American Indian scholars to excel, not only culturally, but academically, out in the community and in all aspects of their life and well-being. And so some of our key points of Indian education are to change awareness into action, as well as to gain equitable results in Indian education for our scholars. Within our ASIO area schools district, we have roughly 438 American Indian students currently enrolled that are eligible for Minnesota Department of Education Indian Education Aid. We also have 303, give or take, American Indian students eligible for Title VI. One of the first questions people have is, why is there two differing student counts for our American Indian scholars? And I'd like to explain that briefly so you can have a little bit of an understanding of some of the unique experiences our American Indian families have within the district. So the first count, eligible for MDE Indian Education Aid, the state definition of who is an American Indian differs from the federal definition. The state definition allows self-reporting, meaning a parent or a student can identify as American Indian through the enhanced racial or cultural data collection checkbox. But for the federal government or Title VI, you're required to prove your eligibility through the descendancy of a tribe, being either a tribal member or a lineal descendant of a tribal member or grandchild of a tribal member. So the federal definition is a little bit more exclusive and is usually tied to tribal sovereignty or blood quantum. So the enrollment within a tribe is usually up to the tribal nation, and each tribe has its own differing definition of who is a tribal citizen. For the state definition, it allows self-identified. It also more broadly defines who is an American Indian student. It could be someone in Central America as well. So our district has been really at the forefront of understanding how this data impacts our students when it comes to reporting on graduation, student achievement in math, reading, and science, and really just identifying who our scholars and families are. And this number is down 9 or 10% from pre-COVID. And this year, the Title VI program through the Department of Education has recognized that all across Indian country, there's been a significant decrease in American Indian student counts due to the effects of COVID-19 on public schools and tribally funded schools. Therefore, they're using the larger count of the last 2 school years. So that actually does benefit our program here in ASIO. We can go on to the next slide here. All right, and then I also wanted to talk about our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. I know we have had a brief meeting with the school board in past years and just this past school year, but I wanted to introduce some of the Minnesota statutes surrounding the APAC. So Minnesota Statute 124D.78 states that a school district in which there are 10 or more American Indian students enrolled, or each American Indian school must establish an American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. Commonly referred to as the APAC, this committee serves as an advisory role to help ensure American Indian students are receiving culturally relevant and equitable educational opportunities. These committees are critical to the achievement and success of our American Indian scholars statewide and offer a valuable opportunity to strengthen district and parent partnerships. Here in ASIO, we have a strong APAC that really guides our program plan for the year and really helps us make data-informed decisions regarding our American Indian students and the educational offerings that we are able to provide. A little bit on this academic year. We've had to, of course, pivot with the COVID-19 reality and how we provide these services for our American Indian students. And we've really taken that challenge head on and been able to make additions to our program in areas that we've really had a focus for the past couple of years. But how can we provide these in a digital space? So first of all, we've been able to provide our classes on a weekly basis through Seesaw, Schoology, and Google Meet to meet with all of our students on a Friday. So we offer student support services as well as a large student hangout on Friday, where there's cultural mentorships and oftentimes community speakers or artists we've had come in and demonstrate their expertise and work with our students. Additionally, we've held student academic and cultural honoring events. At the ESC, we did a PPE giveaway, a winter giveaway. So a lot of these things are culturally based. In our way of recognizing our scholars, we do what's called a Tulikon giveaway. So the person being honored not only receives things, but they also give things. It could be a story, it could be a narrative. But in that way, our students have learned about the giveaway. We've also been able to add a weekly Ojibwe language table as well as a weekly Dakota language table, which I think is really a huge highlight. If you understand that the Dakota and Ojibwe languages are the original languages of this place, Minnesota, but they're critically endangered. The Dakota language has one first language speaker left, born and raised in Minnesota, just one. Everyone else is second language learners. And the Ojibwe language has a few more speakers, but it's also not taught in too many schools. Here in Osseo area schools, we've been able to offer both languages weekly to our scholars through our American Indian Education program, which has really been a tremendous addition this year. Additionally, we've moved our drum and dance class, typically held at Garden City, to a virtual meeting so we can still meet and share knowledge intergenerationally with our scholars and families. Right now, we're working with our APAC on our regalia making. So students and families are working together to create and sew their regalia for our 2022 powwow, as well as this summer. Additionally, we've been doing some hand drum making traditional instruments, essentially. We've been hosting a moccasin game Mondays for students, just kind of an extracurricular opportunity to learn traditional games that are played throughout the Great Lakes and Eastern Plains. For years and continuing this year, we've had an American Indian medicine garden at the ESC where we grow indigenous plants and talk about food sovereignty and that relationship to the land, or Negocia, and that we're all connected and interdependent, and seeing how we're all related through the plant nations. Additionally, we've kicked off our inaugural Native Voices Pbis cohort. We'll touch a little bit more on each of these later, as well as a continuation of Project Dreamcatcher, which is a program designed to address the overrepresentation of American Indian students in special ed, particularly around EBD. Just to highlight a little bit of our program, we've been, of course, doing the Ojibwe language table, and we don't just teach colors, numbers, and animals like a basic language table. We're actually geared towards creating proficient thinkers and scholars within our indigenous languages that can transmit knowledge through the language. So we've had thematic lessons such as maple sugaring moon, learning about the calendar from a Dakota perspective and the lifeways that go with it, or in this instance, an Ojibwe perspective. So this is the first time we've been able to implement an Ojibwe language table in Osseo in all the years that I've been here, so 6 or 7 years. So it's been really nice to add an additional focus to a language that's not offered in our middle schools or high schools. Next slide. We've also been able to add a Dakota language table that also follows a similar lesson plan that's based on the calendar, the indigenous calendar of this place, a thematic lesson that's pedagogically consistent to create true speakers of the language. Both of these language tables have been attended by numerous students. We've had a little bit higher attendance in our Ojibwe language table, as we have about 3 times more Ojibwe students in our district than Dakota, but we are determined to offer both languages, as this represents the 11 tribal nations of Minnesota. We've also been able to offer resources for Navajo language and the Arikara language to families that reached out with a particular interest in those languages. Additionally, we've added Moccasin Game Mondays with Charles Grola. He's an expert on the game and has written books on it. He's been meeting with our scholars and families on Mondays to teach the protocol, the rules, as well as just having kind of a cultural grounding in Ojibwe worldview. We've also started to offer a hand drum making class. We have 12 students signed up for next weekend's hand drum making class, where they'll be taking down a processed elk hide and cedar frame and creating their own drum and learning the songs through drum and dance that go with it. So we're really teaching the whole life way, not just dropping off items, but providing that cultural foundation. Additionally, our APAC has been working with their families as well as their students to create regalia. So we have a design from some of our younger students creating their fancy shawls and they've been working with their parents, usually their moms, to get to sewing and really design their outfits based on their own dreams and aspirations. One of the ways in which we do a lot of our work is around 4 questions we ask our students. Who are you? Where are you from? Who are your people? And what is your dream? And through those 4 questions, our students really get to delve deep into who they are, their cultural identity, their family identity. But really, the most important piece is being able to articulate their dreams. You know, these dreams may change as they go from elementary to middle school to high school into adulthood, but being able to articulate it to your community is a very crucial step, because through doing that, they garnish the support of their peers to also support those dreams and breathe them into reality. So it's really a framework based in our Dakota way of life that our APAC really connects with. And then we've got our next slide is the Native Voices Pbis cohort. I joined the school board meeting a few weeks ago to talk a little bit more at length about the Pbis cohort. But just as a reminder, Osceola Schools is participating in this MDE cohort. This is the inaugural edition of this, which includes an Indian homeschool liaison training. A lot of our decisions have been guided through a parent survey and student survey that was disseminated last winter and again this fall. Statewide, we also have collected localized data for just within our district to compare it to other school districts in the metro area, as well as the state data. One area where we're looking to receive more responses is in the school staff survey. So that's school staff that work directly with our American Indian scholars, and looking at how we can affect the attendance data and graduation rates, as well as student achievement data for our American Indian scholars. And how this differs from a traditional PBIS model is we really focus on community voice. Everything's rooted in the parent being the expert, as they're the first teacher of the child. And so using that community-informed decision-making, we're able to see this overrepresentation, how it affects our American Indian scholars. And we're looking at expanding this work along with Project Dreamcatcher to also include our African American students that are also overrepresented in the EBD process with student services. So for about 6 years, Osceola Schools has been part of the Project Dreamcatcher, which is a project started in American Indian communities of Minnesota due to the higher proportion of American Indian students receiving special ed services compared to any other group, specifically in the EBD category. Through Project Dreamcatcher, we provide an initial training for Indian ed staff, cultural staff, special education staff, administrative leadership, beginning with a fall kickoff orientation and workshop. There's weekly ongoing coaching and professional development through virtual meetings, localized team building activities, on-site visits and workshops. And the coaching focuses on practicing observational skills, communication, and collaboration between special ed and Indian education, which is working to establish a sustainable implementation model, specifically around these observations that go into the IEPs. This has been really an important piece in really networking and building collaboration with student services over the past few years. And I think it's something that we can really focus on to offer more services to our scholars.
And I think I take it from here, Ethan. So good evening. So excited to be here and share some of the collaborative work we've done between our departments as we're supporting American Indian students and all the students in our system. So as part of our continuous improvement process, Indian educators and members of the Department of Learning and Achievement have collaborated to provide professional development to staff, create instructional experiences that enable all students to learn about Indigenous peoples with a focus on Ojibwe and Dakota communities, and have worked to ensure that our curricular materials are accurate, present multiple perspectives, and are free of stereotypes and biases. Throughout our collaboration, we have focused on the recommendations from the Tribal Nations Education Committee, TNEC, and that we meet with actually bi-yearly, and feedback from our American Indian Education Parent Advisory Committee. Through this collaboration, we have supported teachers with professional development to increase knowledge and understanding on how to incorporate more complete narratives about Native American histories, cultures, and contemporary lives into their teaching. On the screen, you will see some of the professional development offered to elementary teachers to provide more information and support with instructional resources. I'd like to call attention to the professional development sessions that were provided this past October. This training was focused on a framework created by the Native Knowledge 360 Education Initiative, which helps prepare teachers to make informed instructional decisions about the materials and strategies that they use to create inclusive, accurate learning experiences for students. Ethan, were you going to speak to secondary professional development?
Yes. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And as well as in January of 2019, we had a focus for 7th and 10th grade U.S. history teachers, where they received a training not only on the Native Nations of Minnesota's sovereignty, but also the Why Treaties Matter exhibit, which is on permanent display at our state capitol right now, which has been hosted within our district at our annual powwow several times in the past years at Osseo Middle School. Additionally, on February 21st of February this year, 6th grade science teachers received a training on communal stewardship and indigenous ways of knowing. We've included a screenshot from part of the training where we're thinking about water as our connecting source that transcends racial borders, socioeconomic borders, whatever types of boundaries communities might create. Water is what really connects us all. And so the students have been able to take ownership of that connection to the water and really focus on what does communal stewardship mean. And that's been a new concept for some of our teachers, and they've really embraced it and been able to indigenize their science lessons through this. Additionally, we've offered the Pedagogy to Policy training, which is a 2-day training designed to focus on Minnesota history and state standards. 1 day is spent learning from the land, from places of power or sacred sites around the Twin Cities metro area that are often overlooked by settler society today, as well as an 8-hour training in the classroom on how to accurately implement this and providing a tool set to talk about difficult topics such as sovereignty, genocide, and just the ongoing history that's being made in this place by Indigenous people today and into the future. Additionally, we've offered choice sessions through the Native Knowledge 360 Essential Understandings for secondary teachers to be able to bring in authentic resources and amplify Native voices within their classrooms.
So we have also been working on interdisciplinary units in both 2nd and 3rd grade in elementary. And I'm going to speak a little bit more in depth about those. One of the really interesting and successes that we've had is we have been able to share our interdisciplinary units with other systems that are asking for them. So other school districts are contacting us to see if they can have access to the materials that we've created. Ethan has also gotten a lot of student feedback from the American Indian students in the classrooms that have been in the regular classroom and had these units shared with them. And one of the things that they have told Ethan is they've really had an opportunity to see themselves. They enjoyed sharing about themselves and felt very valued in the classrooms. The 2nd grade interdisciplinary unit was created to give all 2nd grade students instruction on the Dakota and Ojibwe tribes in Minnesota with a focus on the Dakota language. The Minnesota state standards are taught through the use of 2 texts, Takawadakahe and Bawaupawa, which are both dual language books written by Indigenous Minnesota authors. The 6 lessons in this unit integrate social studies, language arts, and art standards through lessons on Dakota and Ojibwe languages and culture. Included in this unit are resources to give teachers background on the languages and cultures, and also recordings of the authors reading their own books in Dakota or Ojibwe language, and then also in English. In creating the 3rd grade interdisciplinary units, we heavily relied on the work of Annette S. Lee, who is an associate professor of astronomy and planetarium director at St. Cloud State University and director of the Native Skywatchers. She is also a parent in our district. and her communities are Ojibwe, Dakota, and Lakota. The 10 lessons in this unit focus on the third grade science standard and the benchmarks of gathering information and communicating how American Indian tribes and communities and other cultures use patterns in the stars to make predictions and plans. In addition to the science standards, this unit also meets language arts, visual arts standards. On the screen, you will see the 2 books we used in these lessons. The Forever Sky, which is written by Thomas D. Peacock, who is a member of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, and illustrated by Annette Esley, who I mentioned earlier. Sky Sisters is written by an Indigenous author from Northern Ontario. Also on this slide, you will see the Dakota and Ojibwe star maps that were used throughout this unit. Creating lessons through an Indigenous lens to support a variety of subject areas has been another focus of our collaboration. I'm going to highlight some of the work that has been done to create elementary resources this year. In 4th grade, we focused on lessons that were missing an Indigenous presence and narrative. Through the lessons that were created to fill this void, students learned that before European colonization, American Indians had developed a variety of complex systems of government that embodied important principles for the effective rule, and that for thousands of years, Indigenous people have studied, managed, honored, and thrived in their environments. Our focus for 5th grade this year was on social studies standards. Units were created to provide students with accurate information about historical events, perspectives of Indigenous peoples, and an understanding that Indigenous peoples are still here, have languages and cultures that are present and thriving today. In our secondary, our departments have collaborated on lessons that focus on the Minnesota State science standards around gathering information and communicating the methods that are used by various cultures, especially those of American Indian tribes and communities, and to develop explanations of phenomena and plan solutions to problems. These lessons were designed to ensure that students have the opportunity to view science through the native lens of observation and interrelationships, as opposed to always using the hypothesis and theory lens of Western education. Secondary visual arts teachers have incorporated lessons based on Native art, Native voices resources developed by the Minneapolis Art Institute. These resources include information about Native cultures, both past and present, and support Minnesota state standards for visual arts and U.S. history. The texts we use in literacy instruction throughout our system are selected to give students what we refer to as an opportunity to have a window, mirror, or sliding glass door experience, meaning that students can see themselves in the text that they're reading or see the experience of others and engage with that, or have the opportunity to step through the text into someone else's life. We know that when students see themselves in the lessons and texts, they are more engaged, but it is also important for students to read about the lives and experiences of others to develop understanding and appreciation. We have purchased 3 books to be used in elementary literacy instruction, all written by Indigenous Minnesota authors. The intent of all of the texts that we purchase for instruction is to ensure that students see and understand that Native American nations were in Minnesota before the settlers or explorers came, that Native American nations are still here, and Native American nations have languages and ways of knowing that have survived. One of the texts we use is Negocia's story. It's written by Negocia Gonzalez, who was a 9-year-old at the time that he wrote this book. In this book, he tells about spending time each summer with his family at the Mille Lacs Reservation in Minnesota. Negocia is Ojibwe. And then the second text we purchased, The Sioux Chef, is about connecting, the tradition of connecting food to the past. And Native groups have experienced that many traditional foods are no longer available. Sean Sherman, the author, is a Lakota chef who lives in Minnesota. In this text, he explains about traditional Dakota and Lakota foods and includes some recipes from his James Beard award-winning cookbook. And the third text we've purchased is called Where Two Rivers Meet, and it tells the story of the Bdote through a student's perspective. The student does not see himself or his people represented in social studies lessons at school. And it's written by Odia Wood Kruger, who is an Indigenous Minnesota author and formerly an Indian educator for Minneapolis Public Schools. On the screen, you can see several of the books that have been purchased for secondary literacy instruction that are written by Indigenous authors. Louise Erdrich is the only author who currently resides in Minnesota and has written 2 of the books that we have purchased. Our goal, as we are currently going through the program improvement process for English language arts, is to purchase additional books by Minnesota Indigenous authors.
We are passionate about this work and are excited about the collaboration that's allowed us to provide quality resources for students, trainings for staff, and we know there is much more to do to meet student and community needs and continue to help. We are currently in the planning phase of creating an interdisciplinary unit for 4th grade, similar to the units that have been created for 2nd and 3rd grade. Our goal is to create units for each grade level at the elementary levels. Indian educators and members of the Department of Learning and Achievement are developing lessons for each grade level. In addition to the lessons we have shared with teachers this year, we are near completion of 1st grade and 2nd grade science lessons and will continue to work on science lessons at each grade level to ensure that students have the opportunity to view science through an Indigenous lens of observation and interrelationships, as opposed to always using the hypothesis, theory, or lens of Western education. Over the past 2 years, members of the Department of Educational Equity, members of the Department of Learning and Achievement, and Indian educators, as well as classroom teachers, have spent significant time reevaluating current curricular resources to identify and eliminate information and images that are inaccurate, stereotypical, or do not provide authentic or multiple perspectives. When identified, these materials have been removed and replaced with a culturally responsive resource, and we are continuing this process this summer with a strong focus on 3rd and 5th grade social studies. We've got a link to a lot of our resources on the next slide, but we just wanted to say, wo pita tanke chichiapido. Thank you all for listening to our presentation.
Thank you so much. I will open it up to board members again for questions or comments. Director Brooks.
Thank you for this presentation today. I do have a couple questions. I think one sort of gets at the books that were purchased. I believe there were 3 for elementary. That doesn't seem like a high number. And this discussion has come up in meetings I've had it out in the district. But as teachers or ESPs go out to purchase or acquire other books, is there some sort of rubric or some sort of guide that can help determine if that or
You're kind of cutting out, Thomas.
sorry, I'm pretty close to the phone. Is there some sort of guide or rubric that teachers or ESPs can use when they're bringing in other material into the classroom to supplement the 3 that have already been purchased by the district?
Yes, and the 3 for elementary, but we have multiple books that are purchased that are already been purchased in our media centers. So these books are book sets that are used for specific instruction. But we do have a rubric that we're using as we make sure that our books are inclusive and really show accurate depictions of people. So we do have a rubric that can be used. And we have in the last few years, we've purchased classroom libraries that are really diverse classroom libraries for grades 2 through 5 also at this point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ethan, just kind of a quick question for you. So you always incorporate language when you present to the board, like tidbits. And so have we thought about ways to incorporate language in the classrooms or in our school environments in a way that is kind of easy for our kids to pick up and use on a day-to-day basis? I kind of think about, gosh, I don't even want to say it on camera, Lake Pbis, that has sort of become a household name. And I always feel like I'm butchering it, but yeah, just have we thought about ways to sort of incorporate language sort of district-wide to, I guess, more deeply ingrain American Indian culture into our districts?
Yeah, that's a great question. A few years ago, we actually made the addition of Dakota, Ojibwe, and Ho-Chunk language to all of the welcome signs at all of our buildings. So students see their language included along with all of the foreign languages like English and French and German, Somali, Hmong, all these other languages that we think of as more traditionally spoken languages. One thing we haven't included in this presentation is this year we've actually applied for the NAM grant through the Office of English Language Acquisition, which is a 5-year grant which would allow us to implement Dakota language within our high schools and allow it to be actually offered to allow our students to access the bilingual seals. This is actually the first year that the Minnesota Department of Education has offered a bilingual seal for Ojibwe or Dakota language. Previously, Indigenous languages weren't seen as a world language by the state. We've been systematically made invisible. So this is the first year that they'll be offering the bilingual seals for scholars. There hasn't been any students around the state that have taken the test this year due to infrastructure needs with creating these classes, but we have taken the steps in applying for the NAM grant to secure funding to bring language teachers, language resource development, as well as curriculum development on board in Osseo area schools to provide this opportunity for our high school scholars and hopefully for more grades into the future. And I'm always for using more Dakota language in any of our translations. The only thing is, as I mentioned, there's only one first language speaker in the state in her 90s. So it's very tough to find people to do the translation services for that. But it's something we could definitely be looking to as we see Dakota language being used more prevalently around the state, not just in lake names, but, you know, in cities, counties, all around us, the Dakota language, even our state name, Minnesota. So there's a lot of education that can go on with our Dakota language, but I think we've been doing a pretty good job in implementing the books Bow Wow Powwow and Daku Adaka Hey to introduce the language to Native students as well as non-Indians as well. So for all students.
Thank you. I don't have too many more questions, but again, just thank you for the work that both and everyone across the district. I know just looking back on this past year, I'll often get a rundown or some sort of update of something that my fourth grader learned in the classroom. And the one that I remember very clearly because it was in full detail and it went on forever like an encyclopedia, but it was an American Indian lesson earlier in the year. So this is so important. I hope that we can continue to find ways for our kids to be excited about it and continue to incorporate it in the classroom. But just thank you for all of your work.
Thank you, Director Douglas.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Director Brooks for bringing that up specifically. And then also Ethan for your response. I really appreciate it. One thing that as a board member, pre-pandemic, when we would go to our MSBA trainings or conference, you know, that 3-day event, one of my favorite parts was connecting with some of our northern districts who actually do a lot more of incorporating the Dakota and Ojibwe education and language into their programming at their schools. And every time we have this conversation, the thing I come back to every time is how can we as a board and an administration better connect with those leaders who are doing this work on a regular basis, and in some cases they're even doing it almost as a requirement in how they educate, and how can we incorporate more of those principles and aspects into our everyday learning for our students. And what Director Brooks's comment reminded me of is how I don't remember anybody ever teaching me certain words that I know in other languages. It just became kind of part of the process, just like what you were saying, Ethan, about the welcome sign. There's just certain things that, you know, if I hear certain words in other languages, I know what they mean. And they're very basic words: hello, goodbye, you know, maybe 1 through 10 or 1 through 20 in numbers, but really simple things that we can do at a very introductory level for our youngest learners all the way on up, you know. And I just would really like to see our board and our administration take a more active approach in incorporating those things into our everyday learning in really basic ways. You know, we often say, you know, we teach kids, you know, how to sign, you know, the alphabet or things like that. Just really simple things that we can do to expand their knowledge and interest in those things, so that they can explore them and understand better the history of our community and you know, where we live, and exactly what you were saying about, you know, how our community was built on these lands and how important it is to respect that and to honor that as we move forward historically. So I just want to say thank you again for presenting, and encourage our administrative team and us as a board to continue to push forward to include those things on a more regular and integral process for our students.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Director Grady?
And thank you all for the beautiful work that you've done to teach all of our students. Sorry, changing here. Teach all of our students about the people indigenous to Minnesota and supporting positive identity development of our American Indian students. This is definitely aligned with our strategic goals and our plan, in addition to working on the achievement gap. I agree with Director Douglas that the board and administration really could benefit from this training, and I'm hoping that that's something we can look into adding to our schedule so that we're all really informed about what our roots are. I don't know, my child is in 8th grade and they've missed out on some of this, and I'm really glad that it is now being integrated into our elementary and secondary locations. I just have one question. What are the biggest obstacles to developing and implementing the curriculum as you have worked so far and as you continue to build that into our system?
From my perspective, it would be a lack of teacher preparedness when it comes to teaching unfamiliar topics, you know, but we teach all sorts of difficult topics in school that we're not necessarily experts in. And so being able to work with Robin over the last few years, we've been able to identify a lot of resources and processes to help these teachers that are experiencing discomfort, and really utilizing the CLEAR model when they're implementing these lessons into their classroom has been very useful. You know, thinking about how we can even have localized lessons. For example, Pierre Bottineau, you see his name throughout Maple Grove and Osseo. No one knows he was Ojibwe in Dakota. We just think he's a settler. So providing these localized historical pieces, but also providing the teachers with the tools and confidence that they need to teach unfamiliar topics. So I think the 2-day pedagogy to policy training has been very meaningful in getting these teachers prepared and building that confidence. But I think there's much more work that can be done in terms of teacher development.
Dr. Grady, if I may jump in here. Ethan refers to the CLEAR model and the pedagogy and policy. 6 years ago when I came to Osseo, I introduced the CLEAR model within the system. And the CLEAR model is an indigenous way of knowing and offering pedagogy. If you read Policy 101, it's literally written, Policy 101 is literally word for word the CLEAR model. And as we continue to help our staff and scholars experience this Indigenous way of knowing and being, it will continue to make a difference. When you ask the greatest obstacles, I think honestly, and you've heard me use this statement before, we function in a historically white society, right? And under historically white norms. And Indigenous ways of knowing and being are at times contradictory to that way. So, for example, what if all knowledge that is, has been, or ever will be, has and will continue to always exist? What if that's true? I know, Director Grady, you've heard me say this before, but that's an Indigenous way of knowing and being. That radically changes the entire approach to pedagogy. The process of learning then becomes drawing out that which is already there, rather than assuming that we are the experts and we're embedding something on somebody. I honestly believe that the answers to the world's crisis, the answers to the crisis that we are experiencing now as a community, the answers to the murders that we're encountering within our Black community, the hatred that we're recognizing towards our Asian Pacific Islander community, those recent deaths, and all of these things are based upon the concepts, the answers lay within the knowledge that we as Indigenous people have. You've heard Ethan continually offer the term Medakwewasa, this idea of all my relations. And Director Simons, I heard you reference something down that path, not necessarily using that terminology, but in some of the civil rights movement, we hear the term solidarity, but it's comparative to that, right? And the See and the Clear model is definitive that it starts with the human purpose. And when we recognize the humanity, and when we, especially as it relates to Indigenous people, when the word was is eliminated from the way that we address who we are as Indigenous people and understand that who we are and is, when that becomes our norm, and this other way of knowing and being is embraced, we'll see the healing that we're looking for as a community. We'll see the knowledge drawn out from the scholars, and we'll see this institutional structure of oppression eliminated. And so the CLEAR model, even though we may not really know it and wasn't marketed that way to you when I brought it to you, is an Indigenous way of knowing and being and interacting. And I want to thank the district for embracing it to the extent that it has. But at the end of the day, it will be time and money to really be able to afford people that type of training. And then it will, I'll just use a capacity equation, I'll be quiet. We can offer all the knowledge, which both the colleagues that presented today are showing some of that knowledge. We can work at developing the skill. Unless it's multiplied by the personal investment of the individuals within the process, our capacity will not change. And that will require us to systematically change our way of knowing and being and embrace another way of knowing and being. When we do that, we will have the maximum aptitude to change. And I want to simply say, we saw that happen today. The sport embraced that. And Assistant Superintendent Lehan, I want to thank you for modeling humanity today. And when we know what that looks like and we embrace that, we will see the changes that we were looking for as a community. So, dono de gohai. Wadu.
Thank you, Rev. Director Simons.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you, Ethan and Robin. It's really been a pleasure to be able to participate at the TNEC reviews, and just how much you have grown, and I should say our district has grown, how much you have led us in that work. I just think about where we were in that very first meeting that I attended and where we are now. It's such a dramatic and tremendous improvement, I think, and I love the partnership that you're having with the parent community. I love the best practices that you're bringing. It's just been phenomenal. I'm so happy that the rest of the board members got to see some of the things that I get to see in those meetings. And so I won't belabor that, but I just really have a ton of appreciation. I'm very excited about how we'll continue to grow this and how this can serve as a model for the other work that we're doing to ensure that our students have the opportunity to retain culture and language in our district. So thank you guys. Just excellent. Well done.
Thank you, Director Simons. Director Mosqueda Jones.
I just want to echo the appreciation I have for this work and how excited I am as a teacher to see these efforts go forward. I'm looking forward to hearing about our first student receiving the bilingual seal in either Ojibwe or Lakota. I really am very excited about that. One of the things that I've seen done that I think was very powerful is a couple of questions I have. Do we in our district have areas for native plants in like our growing area besides the ESC where we have the medicinal plantings that children or students can actually be a part of? And then do we have any kind of thing where there's like a food cart type of teaching around, just because a lot of culture happens around food, and Ethan, you talked about with the sous chef and the loss of the food and the cultures. Do we have any of that in this district? Is that something we're looking at all?
I'm not aware of any other sites other than the ESC that are particularly doing this, but within our Indian Ed program this year, through the recommendation of our APAC, we're actually working on a home garden set for people to plant some of these native plants as well. So our Indian education staff and Indian education students are working on this, but I think it's definitely something that we could expand to all students at the various sites around the district.
I just know from a personal perspective as a teacher teaching 4-year-olds when we had our native indigenous peoples lessons, and someone came in and made wild rice and talked about how it was cultivated and the culture around that, and read a story that was really, that whole integration that you're doing with your lessons, it's pretty powerful and sticks with them. So I just want to say, since I've experienced that as a teacher, that I know that the teachers that are implementing your lessons are probably as excited as I am, and that the students are even more excited. So thank you very much for your work.
Yeah, and I thank you everyone for your comments, and of course for this presentation. Ethan, I had a chance to visit with Ramona Stately, and I had no idea all the work that you have been doing outside of the district. I just think it's just phenomenal, and it's brought us to a place from when I talked to Ramona, like, we're doing things in our district that other districts, I mean, we're definitely ahead. I mean, and made a lot of progress. And so I'm so proud of that work. And I know Rev, you were instrumental in that too, and Ramona and Ethan. So I'm grateful, and Robin. So thank you. I just, all I can say is just like, I think it is critical to, infuse, the culture and the language for our students, all of our students, and then in particular Native students. Just because obviously, the history is banned, the language loss, the cultural loss. I mean, it's just heartbreaking, like, just the loss over the years, and honestly not too long ago, and so I just think it's so important. And I also, in terms of training, I mean, absolutely, as a board or professional development, I mean, I'm very interested, but also, I know there's been emphasis on teachers, but I also think of all of our staff. I think of, like, when you're greeted when you first come into a building, and having training, or, our custodial staff, our food service workers, because I think that throughout our organization, our district, it's not only our teachers that come in contact with our families, it's and to have an understanding, it's everyone. So I'm really interested in that piece too, to further that. So Superintendent McIntyre, Mike, do you have anything else you want to add before we adjourn this evening?
I have a couple of comments, but I'll check with Michael here if there's anything you want to say before I add some thoughts.
No, nothing else from me. Thank you, Ethan and Rodney, for your presentation.
Well, I think back to our goal for this evening, Chair Dawson, Walton, I think we hit that target as far as providing the board with a deep, comprehensive look, at least a snapshot, a little deeper comprehensive look at our programming, but also the improvement efforts and how we're working hard to integrate all these elements into the daily experiences of our students. And I want to echo the board members and especially Director Simons, because I agree, even since when I've come on into the district, the level of improvement that has happened in a short period of time, and the focus, and also the very tangible, actionable things that have happened. So I'm very proud of this team and our overall, all of our leaders, because it really does take a lot of leadership to change practice and change behavior. So I guess I want to say thank you for the opportunity to go a little deeper tonight and give you a more comprehensive look at so much work that has been happening, is currently happening, and we still have, as Ethan said earlier, a lot of work to do. But we're really proud of the path we're on here and excited about what's coming, honestly. So thank you very much, Ethan and Robin, and so many others that really couldn't be here but are critical to the work happening. So with that, Chair Dawson Walton, thank you. I'll turn it back to you to adjourn.
We have minutes to spare for our 6 o'clock deadline, so that's good. It does, everyone check, it does look like there are some curfews in place that are city specific. So it looks like Maple Grove is at 10 and Brooklyn Park's at 8. I'm not sure if Osseo has one or not, but anyways, thank you all. This work session is adjourned at 5:54 p.m. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.